how do we even know that we are talking about an equation? What is this thing called an equation? Well, this is the way it works. If two expressions are separated by an equal sign, then we have an equation. Okay, so remember, an expression, just to remind you again, is anything that has numbers or the units for the numbers or those symbols for the numbers, as well as operating symbols. Okay, so 15 in this case is indeed an expression. It's an expression containing one number. On the other side of the equation sign, we have another expression. This expression consists of two numbers and an operating sign of which one is unknown. Okay, that's the next thing we need to know about equations. Equations contain known numbers, known as constants, and unknown numbers known as variables. So there you have your two known numbers, 15 and 7, and your variable, which in this case is x. And the thing with equations is that they must be solved. Remember, expressions we try to simplify, equations we try to solve. Okay. To solve an equation means to find a value for the unknown numbers that will make the equation true. So in this case, if 15 is equal to x plus 7, x must be 8 because it is the only thing that will make this true. It's the only thing that will make it true. Okay. Now, sometimes in the higher, more advanced maths, you could have more than one number that satisfies x. Okay. For instance, if I give you something very simple, like the square root of 4 equals x. Now, the square root of 4 is 2, but it could also be minus 2, because minus 2 times minus 2 will also give you 4. But we are not going to look at those. We are simply going to look at equations where we are trying to solve one value for x. Okay, so let's have a look at it. We are trying to solve an equation with one variable. That one variable in this case is x. Okay, so let's take 3x plus 15 equals x plus 7. Okay, what do? We move the variables left and we move the constants right. And the only thing we must remember is that when we cross the equal sign, then the sign will change. So 3x stays on the left. We move x to the left as well. It crosses the equal sign. It was positive, so it becomes negative. 7 is already standing on the right-hand side. There it is. We're going to move 15 to the right-hand side as well. It's crossing the equal sign. At the moment, the sign is positive. Now the sign becomes negative. Okay. But now we know that 3x minus x is simply 2x. 3 apples minus 1 apple will give you 2 apples. So that thing still remains the same. 3x minus 1x is 2x, and 7 minus 15 is minus 8. Okay. Next thing we must do is to get the variable alone. And the way to get the variable alone is to do the same operation both sides. So to get x alone, I must divide. To get x alone, I must divide by 2. Okay, so if I'm going to divide on the left by 2 on the left-hand side of the equation, I must do the same on the right-hand side. So 2x divided by 2 is x, that's what I want. And minus 8 divided by 2 is minus 4. So I've solved this equation. X is equal to minus 4. Okay, now let me just quickly see if I actually did the exercises. I did some of them. Okay, let's park this exercise 7G for now, And what I will do is, when I am done with this, I will do, oh no, I see I've done it. Okay, sorry, I lie. It's because it's not set out. And then when I get to the last one here, I do it on the next slide. Sorry, my mistake. Didn't see what I was doing. So here we have the equation. The equation is there. Don't know what happened there. It says x plus 1 equals 23. In your textbook, this is your exercise 7G, although it was in the old one. Whatever chapter or module this is in, it will still be G, and it is 1 to 5, what I'm doing. Okay, so x plus 1 equals 23. Okay, I want to have the x alone, so I must move the 1 across the equal sign, therefore the sign change, x is equal to 22. No problem there. Here we have minus 5f equals 20. How do I get f alone? I divide with minus 5. So if I divide 20 with minus 5, I get minus 4. Here we have something different. It says G plus 5/3 equals 2. Okay, so let's get G alone. If I want to get G alone, I must subtract 5/3 both sides of the equation. But 5/3 can also be written as 1 and 2/3 because, I mean, 3 goes into 5 once, rest 2/3. Okay, because if 3 goes into 1, it is 3, so you sit with the rest of 2. And you can clearly see that 2 minus 1 and 2/3 is simply a third. Okay, you can see that. 2 minus 1 is 1. And then you subtract a further 2/3 and you are left with a third. Okay. Next one. 3h over 4 equals 12. We want h alone, but the first thing we do is we get rid of the 4. So if we multiply both sides of the equation with 4, we move forward. So now we have 3h is equal to 48. But I don't want 3h, I want h. So I must divide with 3. 48 divided by 3 is 16. So h equals 16. Okay. Here we now have one that's much like the one that I did before, if it's not exactly the same. No, it's not exactly the same because there's a t and not an x. Okay. So now we have an unknown on both sides of the equation. So 3t minus 5 equals t plus 7. Okay, we want all the unknown numbers on the variables on the one side. 3t minus t will give me 2t. Why? Because if I move the t across, the sign change, 3t minus t gives me 2t. I must also move the 5 across to where I have the other constant. 7 plus 5 is 12. So 2t equals 12. And if I divide both sides with 2, I'm left with t equals 6. Then we get to number 6. So I said to you, this is 1 to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we get to number 6, which says 3x minus 4 in brackets plus 6 equals x plus 4. Now, how do we do that? I've done it for you on the next slide. Okay. And the trick here is to use something that we call distribution. Okay. And it means we have a number outside the brackets and we have numbers and operating sign inside the bracket. Okay. So how does this work? We multiply the term outside the bracket, the 3, with both terms inside the bracket. That's how distribution works. So 3 times x is 3x minus, we're not going to change our sign, 3 times 4 is 12, plus 6 equals x plus 4. And then we solve it as normal. We want all the variables on the one side, and we're going to move the x across the equal sign, so the sign is going to change. So on the one side, we have 3x minus x. On the other side, we have the 4 that was there already, and I simply said plus 6. How do I get that? Well, minus 12 plus 6 on this side is simply minus 6. If you've forgotten how to do that, the operating signs are different, and if they are different, you subtract the one from the other and you keep the sign of the highest one. So it's minus 6, but when you take the minus 6 and you move it across the equation sign, it becomes a plus 6. Okay, so now we just do it. 3x minus x is 2x, and 4 plus 6 is 10, and then I must divide both sides of the equation with 2 to get the variable alone, and then I'm sitting with x equals 5. And then we have solved equations using distribution. Okay, does get a little bit more tricky if we have to solve an equation where the variable is a fraction, especially if the variable is in the denominator of the fraction. Okay, so here we have 1 over 2y minus 3 equals 8. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we start by getting the variable alone as usual. So we're simply moving the minus 3 across the equation. 3 plus 8 gives us 11. Oh, I want to do that. Okay, so 1 over 2y is 11. What we then do is we inverse both sides. Now remember, when we inverse a fraction, we swap the numerator and the denominator around. So instead of 1 over 2y, we say 2y will be equal to, we swap the other one around as well. Remember, any integer, any whole number can be written on 1, and so therefore if we swap it around, we get 111. And then we save it as per normal. Okay, we want to get the y alone, so we must divide by 2 on the left side of the equation, and we must divide by 2 on the right side of the equation. Now here, remember, same thing again. We can use the inverse rule again, because we know that if we have fractions and we divide fractions, we can change the division sign into a multiplication sign and inverse the following term. So we keep the first one the same, 1 over 11 or 1/11, and we now multiply it with a half, inversing the 2. 1 times 1 is 1, and 11 times 2 is 22, and so the answer is 1/22. Okay. Good. Almost there. 2 slides left. Okay. There are some common formulas, and guys, you must study the common formulas in your textbook. There's also the one for Pythagoras, which I didn't include here. I don't think so. No, I didn't. Okay, because I wanted to show you the principle that we use all the time. So a formula is simply an equation with standard symbols or words. Let's have a look at the one for profit. Profit is equal to your revenue, also known as your turnover, minus your expenses. Okay, you could use the words profit equals revenue minus expenses, or you could simply use the symbols P, R, and E. It will give you the same thing. But that is a common formula that you must know, or else you're not going to be able to complete your bookkeeping. Okay. What about distance? Distance, we know, is equal to speed times time. Okay, this so that is the standard formula. You were told this somewhere in high school, and you must still remember it. This is the common one we're trying to remember. Distance equals speed times time. Then the perimeter of a rectangle. The perimeter is equal to 2 times, and in brackets, in parentheses, the length plus the width. Whereas the area of a rectangle A is equal to the length multiplied by the width. Okay. And then this one that you always get somewhere as a short question in a test or an exam, degrees Fahrenheit is equal to 1.8 degrees Celsius plus 32. How do you know that? You memorize it. Okay, so these are common fractions that or common formulas rather that you have to memorize, and please remember you must also memorize Pythagoras here, where you are working with the square of the hypotenuse. I'm going to let you do that yourself. Did you now hear those words? No? Now I say I'm going to leave you to do that yourself, and then Kara's radar goes up and she says, we must do that as part of the assignment. Yes, because you're going to get it in the exam. Okay, so last thing we can then do is we can change the subject of the formula. Okay, so remember on slide 19, I gave you the formulas. Now we start with those formulas on page 20 or on slide 20. And the rule says any part of a formula can be made into the subject by applying standard equation rules. What are the standard equation rules? Well, if you move across the equal sign, the value of the plus and the minus change, and you can invert and you can do all the things that we've just talked about. So let's look here at profit equals revenue minus expenses. If that is true, then revenue, if you have that alone, will be equal to profit plus expenses, because really the only thing that happened is that expenses had to move across the equation sign so that you could have revenue alone. The same for expenses. If you have the other two and you need to know what your expenses is, you are simply moving the revenue across the line, but then you don't want a negative expense, so you must basically move everything. Okay, and then all the signs will change. So E equals revenue. Your expenses is equal to your revenue minus your profit. What about our distancing? Okay, we said that, let's just go back there. We said the distance is equal speed times time. So if that is true, and we want speed alone, we must divide with time. If we want time alone, we must divide with speed. And there you have it. Speed equals distance divided by time. See Kaledi is joining us. Welcome, Kaledi. And similarly, time is equal to distance divided by the speed. Okay, let's look at this next one here. Remember what it was? It was all about the perimeter of a rectangle. So we said the perimeter of a rectangle is 2 times the length plus the width in brackets. Okay, let's have a look. If that is true, and we want L alone, or the length alone, how does it work? Well, first thing we must do is we must divide both sides of the equation with 2. So the perimeter divided by 2 will be length plus width. But we actually want length and width on its own. Okay, so another way of just doing it is actually to start with the distribution rule. Park this because I'm going to do it for us in Excel as well. I'm going to do it now, but I'll do it in Excel as well, just so that you can understand what I was doing. If we use the distribution rule first, we will see that P is equal to 2L plus 2Y. Okay, and if we do that first, it is actually easier to get the L alone and to get the width alone. Okay, because remember, you are then going to sit with 2L plus width, which means that you only thing you want to do is you want to move the width across the line. So you will have on one side of the equation, you will now have 2L, and on the other side you will have P minus 2 width. And then to get 1L alone, you must divide the entire thing with 2. Okay. Remember how a dividing line works again? A dividing line tells us that we solve everything above the line first, and then we apply the operation below the line. Okay. Please, it's the only time where we cannot, where the order of operations will give you different answers for using a division sign and using a dividing line. And that is, so you can't just, so if you have a dividing line on your calculator, it means that you will have to put what's above the line in brackets, in parentheses, before you can do it on your calculator. In fact, it's a very good tip. If you are in doubt and you want to feed in the information on your calculator, put the parentheses there to start with. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Area is equal to the length multiplied by the width. So if you want the length alone, you would have to divide with the width, the area by the width. If you want the width alone, you would have to divide the area by the length. Okay, and then this one, very important, because this is what they do in the exams. This is an exam question. What they do is they give you the temperature in Fahrenheit, and then they ask you to calculate the temperature in Celsius. Okay, don't try and remember this. This is your formula. The standard formula is where you have Celsius and you are calculating Fahrenheit. Okay, so the standard formula says that degrees Fahrenheit is equal to 1.8 degrees Celsius plus 32. But now what do we do if we want the Celsius alone? Okay, first thing we would do is we would divide the 32, sorry, getting tired. You would minus the 32 on both sides. So F Fahrenheit minus 32 now gives you 1.8 degrees Celsius, but you want Celsius on its own. So you are going to divide that entire thing with 1.8. And remember again, if you do it on your calculator, you will add the parenthesis signs there. So on your calculator, you would say equals whatever the value is that you have for F, but no, not yet. So you would say equal bracket what you were given in degrees Fahrenheit minus 32, close the bracket, divided by 1.8, and then you will have the right answer. Why do I say that? Because remember, our order of operation says that we do division before we do subtraction. So if you're not going to add the brackets, your calculator is going to read it that you says it is F minus in brackets 32 divided by 1.8, and that is not what you want to do. So therefore, please add the brackets there.